Good morning, guys. We are going to jump into our lesson on the cooperation and the conflict between the colonists and the Native Americans. First, we're going to talk about how they cooperated and worked together. Okay. As more Europeans came to the Americas, the Native and the settlers actually did form good relationships. For most of the 16 and 1700s, they cooperated with each other and they lived in harmony for the most part. A lot of their good relationship was was centered around trade, especially around fur. So European fur traders worked closely with Native Americans to kind of find the lay of the land. Okay. Europeans then started making more goods from the animals in the Americas, like metal tools, blankets, cloth, glass beads, yarn, ribbon, jewelry, and the natives really helped them with this process. They also made some political agreements. We talked the other day about how they did work together to write treaties. Sometimes these treaties were kind of tricky, though, because the natives didn't always understand the language. Okay. These treaties were normally land agreements. The Native Americans and the Europeans would agree to trade land for goods at times. But again, sometimes these treaties and agreements were just unfair. They weren't. They were one-sided and more just better for the Europeans. The natives did teach the colonists a lot of things, okay, because it was difficult to survive on this land, and the natives have been doing it for years, okay? So they showed these new colonists different techniques for successful adapting, like hunting, fishing, growing crops year-round, growing tobacco, making medicine, and cooking foods and keeping it so it wouldn't spoil. The Europeans, as we talked about the other day, did introduce animals to the Native Americans that really changed their lives, including horses, okay? Those became an integral part of Native cultures as soon as they were introduced. They used them to travel. They used them for everything, okay? It made hunting and traveling and carrying things easier, okay? The natives were also introduced to other animals like sheep and cows, which really kind of changed the game for them. However, there was some conflict, okay? Tensions begin to rise, okay? Even though they had that peaceful beginning, eventually the Native Americans and the colonists do not get along. They are culturally very different. They have very many different beliefs, such as religious beliefs, okay? And this led to battles and eventually war. One example of this would be John Smith's raid. Captain John Smith was the leader of the Jamestown colony. He explored that area in New England and established trade with the local tribe. But then he forced the natives into unpleasant work and really slavery because they did not bring food to trade. Okay, so that didn't really end well. Smith and the colonists raided the native supplies. Okay, so they took what they had already accumulated and they took it by force. Powhatan, the chief of the tribe, ordered an attack on the colonists in retaliation. And by the year 1614, the two sides finally settled peacefully, but it was after a lot of bloodshed. The Powhatan War, that chief did die in the year 1618, and his brother decided to continue the fight with John Smith and those settlers in Jamestown. On Good Friday in the year 1622, he launched a massive attack on Jamestown that nearly destroyed it. But before the battle ended, 347 colonists were killed. The settlers and the Native Americans fought until the year 1645, and then the chief was captured and killed by that year. The Pequot War, this was a tribe of very warlike people. They had already established dominance over the surrounding tribes. They were kind of like the leader in the area that they were in Connecticut, what is now Connecticut. Two groups of colonist traders were killed by them because they thought they cheated them in trade. So they thought that they weren't being fair, so they killed them. The English responded to that by sending 90 military soldiers to attack those natives. They proceeded to that village and captured and murdered the colonists. They were unsuccessful in their attempts to capture the murderers, but they did burn the village down and killed one native, and then that provoked this war. The English gathered 90 men and 260 native allies. They actually had some tribes that they were aligned with the English because the Pequot were so dominant in that area. A lot of people did not like them. 400 men, women, and children were killed, while 7 of the Pequot were captured and 7 more escaped. Several other battles between the Pequot and the English followed that event, but the English won, okay? In 1638, September of that year, the Treaty of Hartford was signed to end that war. There was also King Philip's War from 1675 to 1676. King Philip's War occurred when the Native Americans in southern New England tried to drive out the English settlers. They were sick of them being there, and they tried to get them out. Tensions were high because the English were encroaching on the natives' land, and they were forcing them to recognize English rule. Okay, and the Native Americans were sick of that. Why did they have to be ruled by the English is how they felt. The chief, Metacom, he was known as King Philip, actually, led an uprising of the native tribes against the settlers in that area. The fight lasted over a year, okay, and destroyed 12 frontier towns. It ended in the year 1676 when Metacom was captured and beheaded, which obviously was not good for those natives. And then we do have the beginning of the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War took place when France and Great Britain fought over the control. They fought over the control of the North American territory and who was in charge. Okay, in North America, French colonists and their native allies battled against English colonists and the Iroquois Confederacy, which is one of the largest tribes. Okay, in 1754, the English colonial forces, led by George Washington, so this was his first attempt, or bout at leading, attempted to attack the French, who were attempting to clear the area of all the British. Okay, however, the English were outnumbered, and then they were eventually defeated by the French. And France was starting to lose the war by the time Spain joined as its ally in 1761. Britain ultimately won. We know that Britain really took charge in the Americas at this time. Spain did join France and help them, but Britain did win. The war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1763. Great Britain's victory resulted in significant territorial gains, including all French territories east of the Mississippi River, as well as Spanish Florida. So they didn't have that necessarily all that land considered Louisiana by the French, but they did gain a lot of land. All right, go ahead and complete your show. If you have any questions, please let me know.